Ready to restart?
Where's Chairman Drew? Commissioner.
Yeah.
He leave?
I'm going to call the meeting back to order, and at the call of the chair, we'll go back to item 23 and start through our reports. And we'll start 23D, I guess, since we got you guys lined up first. Is there a problem with doing it that way, Harry? Okay. So we'll do item 23D, reports. Application Hunt Draw 2016, Don Sefton, Systems Consultants. Systems Consultants will present an interim annual report of the 2016 Big Game Draw. Information is presented in tables and charts and includes interim application, license and tag fees and counts, as well as bonus point and client statistics for the draws already completed this year. Gentlemen.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commission. We're going to make this real short and sweet today, try to move it right along. I'm going to start out by just going to the page 3, or page 4 with the interim draw statistics. Big numbers to look at on here this year, as is in every year. We did $3 million in tag fees, roughly $2 million in application fees. PIW donations was $164,000. If there's any numbers that stand out to anyone that you have any questions about, let me know. Going from there, I'm going to run all the way down. I'm going to skip down to slide number 42. If you have any questions on anything in between there, feel free to ask. Nothing was huge or significant or stood out to me this year. But on page 42, Commissioner Olmsberg made a catch this year when he was reviewing the numbers. This is a slide with the bonus points held by species post-draw. And when I was preparing this slide this year, the 13, 14, and 15 point columns, each cell was shifted one row down. If you'll notice that antlered mule deer, the points in your copy, the points for 13 points was 13, the points for 14 points was 14 and 15. That entire column needs to be moved up one row. I know there were some corrected copies passed out back today, but I wanted you to be aware of that.
And our thanks to Commissioner Olmsberg.
I'm going to move on down to slide 62. That was one that it's one I just always look at each year. Applicant age, and for the first time in several years, your median age of your applicants was a little bit younger, 14 years and 1 month this year for residents, and 48 years and 8 months for non-residents. That was down from 42. Residents were down from 42.4 to 42.1 this year. If there's not any other questions, we're going to go on down and let Don Sefton take his beating for the things that I did wrong this year in our problems and solutions.
For the record, Don Sefton, Systems Consultants. The summary of the problems is on this first page. I'm going to go through them one by one. As you can see, most of these problems, considering we deal with 64,000 clients and in excess of 220,000 applications, are kind of onesie-twosie type issues, but we do make mistakes, and we like to come clean on them every year. So starting with the first one, we had some clients who were allowed to apply for hunts they were not eligible for. The client eligibility didn't get updated before the application period opened. There were 5 clients/applications. It was a programming error. Short-term resolution was we contacted these clients, we withdrew their apps, and the fees were refunded. The long-term resolution is the programming was corrected. Clients were allowed to apply for, whoops, is that the same one? Oh, this was another set, I guess, of clients that were ineligible, were allowed to apply if they changed their residency, and there were 15 clients' applications, and again, a programming error. We contacted the clients, withdrew the application, and the fees were refunded. And again, the programming was corrected. Clients were allowed to apply for both the Nelson RAM and U hunts. Clients applying for a RAM or a U in one session on the web were able to apply for the other sex if they returned in a second session. 8 clients as a programming error, and we contacted the clients, withdrew them, and the fees were refunded, and the programming was corrected. By the way, every time we have one of these where we correct the programming, we add that to our QA script so that the next year when we go to test, the QA folks have to test that as well just to make sure we don't reintroduce or have the same error recur. I'll be candid and say we'll always make mistakes. Our goal is never to repeat a mistake, and our goal is to have no mistakes, but we always will have some, as we've had again this year. But we also want to make sure we don't repeat a previous mistake, and that's why we put those on what we call recursion testing on the QA script. We mailed some big game tags before the tags were scheduled to be mailed. Basically, our mailroom incorrectly looked at those big game tags and put them in the daily mailing. There was 395 of them. It was an operator or personnel error. There was no short-term resolution. Once the post office gets their hands on it, they're going to keep it. So all the tags were paid for and in good standing, so the real consequence really was only that they got them a little earlier. Now, when we look at the mailings, we've interjected a check with the supervisors having to sign off before they're released to the post office to try and prevent something like this from happening again. Clients who order the big game saleable lists, in the past there's been a lot of controversy about these because they wanted to, this is always the fairness issue of having everybody get the same crack at having the list first thing, because these guys are guides or they're outfitters or taxidermists and they want to contact the potential clients and not have someone else have a better advantage. Obviously the best way to do it is if you can get an electronic list, but we have some people who still take the lists on paper or on labels, and in this case they were mailed on June 10th instead of being delivered or mailed for delivery on June 10th. 2 clients, which these are typically guides, but we also do, we sell lists to everybody from Bass Pro, Shields, Heartland of America. We've had statewide candidates take our list before. We had a candidate about 10 years ago who bought a list of just those people who did not draw. He was going to target them in his mailings. This was a supervisor error in this case. There's nothing we could do at that point because it was discovered on the 10th, and we dealt with that supervisor. We had a client receive 2 tags for the same hunt. Actually, I think we had 3 of those, right? And one of them happens to be sitting back in the back, I think. No, he had to catch a flight. Mr. Dixon from Las Vegas was one of the folks that told us about that. We have a process to reconcile tags to make sure that doesn't happen. Part of the problem is you will get jams and reprints and you have to restart. And so at the end of the process, we need to correlate the tags to make sure we haven't printed 2. Sometimes even the printer will do you a favor and print 2 of them. And so what we do is we print a pseudo number on every tag along with having the pre-printed number that comes from the printer, the red number, if you will. And we correlate those, and if there's one more or one less, or 10 more or 10 less, then we know there's a problem. We start digging through the tags that have been printed, and we print them in buckets, about 100 buckets. So if there's 30,000 tags, there's about 300 tags in each bucket. And we go back through and reconcile each of those buckets. And the process, in this case, they were not caught. They were mailed to the clients. 3 clients were affected. And very honestly, the supervisor, someone who made the previous error, and he's no longer with us, he left under his own steam, but he's no longer with us. He failed to follow our procedures for reprinting tags and correlating, reconciling them. He was reprimanded and he did leave. We had a reallocated Nelson tag on the test range.
And this was a slide that was not in their package.
Right. This one is numbered 80A because it's not in your package. This actually surfaced after we provided the printed items to Suzanne. And in this case, we had some clients hunting on the Tonopah test range, and they have to submit a background check because of where they are in Nevada. And they have to do that no less than 4 weeks prior to the hunt. And so with a reallocated tag, that gets real problematic because they barely had sufficient time to submit those forms. And we also didn't include this. Normally each week we send an interim report to NDOW of the reallocated tags, and so they know what's going on as well, and they would have caught this, I think, as well if they had seen it, and we also failed to do that. One tag, right now the only restriction on reallocating sheep tags is the standard 2-week rule. The omission was a supervisor error. We're aware of it for the future. These test range tags always present a problem if they have to be reallocated. The good news is most people who get a sheep tag don't want to turn it back in. So. NDOW's considering some additional checks before reallocating tags on the test range. And the supervisor reviewed the rest of the report to verify that no other tags had been omitted. I'm going to turn it back over to Monty, and he gets to claim credit for the things that we improved during the course of the year.
We did several things this year to hopefully make your experience with us go better, and we upgraded the SQL servers, the database servers that the application hunt system resides on. It went from SQL 2005 to SQL 2012. And in doing this, we gained a number of improvements that Bill Gates or Microsoft had decided to make in the system. And it gave us a bigger, beefier system, and we put it on a new server at the same time that was bigger and faster. And all of this was as a result of our problems 2 years ago with some performance on the last day. We were trying to make sure we had more than enough steam to get through the application period this past year.
I'm going to interrupt a minute and just mention it. Also, SQL 2012 offers a lot more security features. Encryption at rest is one of the big features of it. So we felt like that was not just a performance improvement, but a security operational improvement as well. We're always trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. So.
Another thing we added this year was something called a load balancer that allows us to distribute the web traffic across multiple web servers, so no one web server has to carry the entire load of the people in the application process. The load balancer also offers some security features as well to make it more difficult for hackers to get all the way to the web server and possibly load a virus. We added a Cisco Layer 3 switch. Once again, this was to improve performance from previous years. And then lastly, we added a phone recording server. We record every phone call that comes in and out of our building. However, that turns into a lot of files, and the server that the phone calls are recorded to had to be backed up periodically, and the phone calls had to be archived. We added a server that would support years of phone calls without requiring a restoration of an archive. Maureen, for example, will call us up and say, did you talk to this client 4 years ago? And we do and have and will pull up phone calls and produce phone calls to a particular phone number for the past 4 or 5 years. And that was a much more time-consuming process for us, and with the addition of this server, it makes it a lot easier. That was the end of our presentation with just about everything cut out of the middle. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, first I wanted to thank you guys for putting this together. I'm sure it's not a 5-minute procedure to put it all together and then to have to condense it into a shorter presentation. I do enjoy seeing it every year and being able to go through it, but at least I have it where I can go back to and look at it. And thank you again for doing that. And are there any questions from the commission for Commissioner Allenberg?
I'd just like to thank Don. I'm sorry about keeping you up at night trying to give me some statistics there, but I do appreciate it. Thank you.
I love great questions, and he brought up a great question. Unfortunately, and I'm going to pick on him here for a second, I got a phone call from him that came into our office, and we take the caller ID off the phone call, and it was a name that was totally unrecognizable to me, and I couldn't figure out who it was, and I thought, well, I'll get back to it next week. And then he called a second time, and that time I listened to it, and it wasn't the caller ID that was coming in to us, and it was Commissioner Allenberg, and I said, uh-oh, I got to get a hold of him. And then when I talked to him, he had a really great question, and it was data we'd already presented. We don't normally just respond to data requests. We funnel those through the director, but in this case it was basically the same data that we'd provided to the TAC, and I had to update the queries, and in the process I found some problems. And because this was a busy week, it turned out to be late at night, but I was thankful that the next morning he told me he had actually received it and looked at it. So, and I think he used some of that information today, so that was great. Yeah, good questions. Jack Robb used to punish me with questions like that when he was on the commission as well, so we're glad to see it.
Thank you, guys. Anything further for Vice Chairman Johnston?
I just had a question, but thank you for putting together the report. On page 34 and 35, and then the following pages is the same table for the non-residents. But on that page 34 and 35, it shows the bonus point and then the percent that were successful. So on the left-hand column you have points, meaning the number of bonus points held, and then the success, how many people, like 5.4% of people holding 0 points were successful, and then it escalates up and then it goes back down. Is there any way, and I don't mean to want to create more work, but can we do that by hunt or by species?
He's just saying this one by the hunt code, or by the hunt number.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You tell me, by hunt and by species.
And the reason I ask, I think it would be worthwhile, especially on the TAC committee, when we look at some of these issues, when you look at how the success rate goes up and then drops off, I'd like to see how that applies across different hunts, especially when you see 24 bonus points and 5.4% success rate and how it goes up and down. I'd like to see that across the different hunts.
And that's a good point, because when you consider a species like goat, where you have 7,000 plus people chasing, I don't know, last year it was 15 tags, I think, a fairly small number of tags, the odds are just tremendously against you, even if you have a lot of bonus points. And you dilute the true performance of more bonus points of, say, a species like deer or like elk, by the fact that you're mixing in the applicants that are going for goat. So I think that's actually a good suggestion. I overheard Monty tell Bob Hoyen, I think, about the growth of this report. It seemed like the first time I did one, it was like 48 pages or something, and you can see it's now over 80. I haven't seen anything that we could reasonably take out, and so we haven't pulled pages out, but each year another question surfaces, and the only thing I'll point out, we're happy to do it, is that we'll be adding 4 or 5 pages to the book, but I think that's a good thing. So.
Right, and understood, and I guess one of the reasons why I'd want to look at that is If you had it for, let's say, elk, and you saw this trend of success going up and then going back down as bonus points increased, I think you're going to see that impact of hunter choice. I think that's going to be the explanation for it. Same with certain sheep tags and different things. So that's why I wanted to break it out by species.
And about 8 or 9 years ago, Mel Belding came to me and asked a question about, at that time he had the maximum desert bighorn points. He had 14. And he said, why is it that less of us, even when you multiply in our number of bonus points, drew than people in other bonus point categories? And he speculated 2 or 3 different things. He said, I think either we're not getting the 14 times 14, which I think is 196 bonus points plus 1 for the app, is 197. And I was able to prove that wasn't the case, or the numbers they were getting didn't reflect that larger pool of numbers, and that was also not true. They were getting better numbers. And I suspected that they weren't making enough hunter choices, because we find people, when they get to a certain point, and it's intuitively, I'm guessing it's around 10 years, they start getting picky with their bonus points and how they apply them. And it's just, how do you spend your capital, basically. And it turned out that wasn't the issue. They were applying with multiple choices. But I found, I can't remember if it was 4 or 5 choices that no person, including Mel, with those who had 14 points, picked in that area. And every one of them would have drawn in that area, because they had a good enough number to draw in that area. And so what we do see is, in some hunts, they actually don't pick all of the choices, and they'll go for less choices. But in all hunts, they tend to be, I've got this many points, I'm not going to give it up for nothing, basically. I want to go for the best choice that I can get. And so they go for the really difficult, hunts that, they're great hunt, but they don't have the opportunity for a number of tags. So that is a good point. Yeah.
Now, do you want those? Do you need those numbers now, or do you just want to see them next year in the report?
Not now, but I would like to see them before next year's report.
Can do.
Yeah, if that's possible, and not a rush.
Well, before the next TAC meeting, is that when you'd like to see them?
That'd be great.
Anything further from the commission? Seeing none, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 23A, Wildlife Trust Fund Semi-Annual Report. Deputy Director Liz O'Brien, a report will be provided on the investment and expenditure of the money in the Wildlife Trust Fund for the period of July 1st, 2015 to June 30th, 2016 pursuant to NRS 501.385. Ms. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace and members of the Commission. I believe you have the report on the status of the Wildlife Trust Fund. We are required to submit semi-annually to the Commission a report of the money in the Wildlife Trust Fund pursuant to the NRS 501.3585. This report is an update for the state fiscal year 2016 to now include the entire year. The department received $345,206 in donations and expended $207,142. Attached to the report is a detail of every gift that we received during that time period. Donations are received from a variety of conservation organizations, industry, and private citizens in support of the department. These donations save state funds, mostly sportsman's fee revenues, and in many instances can be used as match for federal dollars at a rate of up to $3 for every $1 donated. Is there any questions?
Questions from the commission? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 23B, Department Activity Report, Secretary Wasley. A report will be provided on the Nevada Department of Wildlife Activities. Director Wasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, I'm compelled to make a comment that it's unfortunate that the number of empty seats, both out here and up there, realizing travel constraints certainly take some of our commission membership away. As I sat here today and I listened to many of the issues that we dealt with, I'm reminded of the fact that in the West, we lose a football field-sized natural area every 2.5 minutes. Today we talked about Nellis and Fallon and Washoe County Lands Bill, Amadeus Bill. Weekly we deal with issues surrounding mineral extraction, including lithium and gold, energy development, geothermal, wind, corridors for pipelines and power lines, solar arrays, water and drought, invasive species, both aquatic as well as terrestrial. Each of those industries that come to us represent their particular case as inconsequential. The individual impacts are minor, but what we have is a collective and a cumulative effect of these things on our landscape that monopolize our time as an agency. And to me, it's a much bigger issue than animal killing contests or some of the issues that we spend a great deal of time with in here. And I would encourage all attendees and those folks that were here earlier to consider the broader mission of conservation. To me, it's not enough to stand before this commission and represent yourself as a conservationist and expressing concern over what I would consider a small percentage or a small number of animals when we have these kinds of affronts occurring on our landscape and to our species of the 900 or so that the department has a statutory responsibility. So hopefully that doesn't sound overly jaded. But after 2 days of this, I tend to get in that place, especially as I watch the audience wane, and I think about all the good things that our men and women do on a daily basis, and I think about so many of the attendees that are here for a single issue, and really I want to challenge everybody to consider conservation in the broader sense. I'll run through here super quickly and just hit a couple highlights. A couple personnel issues in the interest of time. We have replaced Kim Jolly in the director's office as a management analyst. We just recently offered the position to Ms. Jordan Neubauer, who's helped us with regulations, and she's accepted that position. So we're very grateful to have her back in the director's office. Her skill set will be very welcome in there, and you'll have the opportunity to interface with her through some of the committees that were previously staffed by Ms. Jolly. I did want to put the WAFWA meeting on the Commission's agenda. We have a midwinter WAFWA in January that'll be in Litchfield, Arizona, and encourage the Commission to consider who may be representing the Commission, who may attend on your behalf, and staff will certainly make the necessary travel arrangements. Also want to put on your calendar the Friends of Nevada Wildlife Luncheon. It's been one of the marquee events that the department and sponsors and conservation community friends have assisted with for the last several sessions. That's presently scheduled for March 2nd. Want to get that on commissioners' schedule so that if they're able to attend, they can certainly attend as well. I think you heard an update from law enforcement that considered some of the high-profile cases. There are several issues that I had highlighted in this activity report to put before the Commission. I'll just maybe add a couple more. There was a cow moose was mistakenly killed in Unit 072 by a cow elk tag holder. This also occurred last year, so we're seeing an increasing population of moose in the Silver State. I believe we could have as many as 30 moose. The carcass was confiscated by law enforcement, and a necropsy determined that the moose had carotid artery worms, a condition that can be life-threatening in moose. Additional biological samples were taken to be processed by wildlife health staff. From Fisheries World, staff worked with California biologists in early October to transfer some Walker River Basin cutthroat trout from the headwaters of streams in California to establish a new refuge population in Cottonwood Creek on the Hawthorne Army Depot. The source stream populations in California are in danger of loss because of ongoing drought conditions. Quick update, Fish and Wildlife Service has made a determination of not warranted for ESA listing of the relic leopard frog, which occurs in Clark County and adjacent areas in Arizona. It reflects a payoff from over 10 years of active conservation by NDOW, the National Park Service, Arizona Game and Fish, and other partners through conservation agreements and a strategy developed for the species and just recently renewed. Wildfires in 2016 burned just over 200,000 acres in Nevada. Staff are working with the BLM at the Hot Pot Fire in the Eisenhood Basin area, the Overland Pass Fire in the Ruby Mountains, and the Virginia Fire just north of Reno. Currently, there are approximately 50,000 acres of herbicides, chaining, and seeding to be accomplished beginning earlier this month. The revised industrial artificial pond permit regulation, which you all were very familiar with, passed on consent through the Legislative Commission meeting on September 9th. Skipping over a lot of pretty significant efforts just in the interest of time again. Another law enforcement update that wasn't included in Chief Turnipseed's report. A Las Vegas game warden issued a citation in recent weeks for wanton waste of waterfowl. An Overton McDonald's employee reported that he observed wasted ducks in a trash dumpster. Security video identified the suspects, who were later found to also have shotgun shells and trash bags in their possession that matched the dumpster ducks. Elko game wardens are investigating a similar case of ducks discarded and left to waste near 5th Street in Elko. We had 3 new game wardens graduate from the Post Academy on November 10th. 1 more will graduate from the Southern Nevada Academy next month. Also, 2 new hire candidates are going through background investigations right now with a planned start date of early January. Training of all of the new wardens we've hired in recent years has become a monumental effort, but we're all very excited about the young new talent in the law enforcement division. And as a follow-up to a statement I made earlier this morning, we will compile a log of all the positive comments particular to our game warden efforts in the state and provide that to the commission just to share some of those positive comments and efforts. The duck stamp judging for the ruddy duck was done November 10th, and Guy Crittenden of Richmond, Virginia was selected as the winner. Interviews for the statewide outdoor education coordinator were held, and Aaron Keller was chosen to fill that position. The National Archery in the Schools program, since the beginning of the 2016-17 school year, we've added 7 new schools to that program. We provided training for teachers and assisted schools in purchasing equipment by providing over $7,000 in grants. The funding for grants was provided by Nevada Bighorns Unlimited and the National Archery in the Schools national program. The value of that is well beyond what many folks may realize. This isn't a simple hunter recruitment tool. What this is it's providing an opportunity for individuals to participate in an activity that is instrumental into funding conservation. So as we look at archery as an activity, depending on the statistics you look at, somewhere between 16 to 23% of those who participate in archery hunt, which means the vast majority of those people who are paying 11% excise tax on all that equipment are not having a biological impact per se, directly a detrimental impact. Their effects are positive. By creating this opportunity, I'm participating in this activity and promoting the National Archery in the Schools program. We are basically increasing the federal excise tax due to the sales of all that equipment and directly funding conservation in Nevada. Public information, the Public Affairs produces a weekly television segment for KOLO-TV in Reno, featuring topics of seasonal interest. Plans have also been finalized for the taping of 3 NDOW projects as segments for the PBS television show Outdoor Nevada. Plans call for the taping of a gill netting fish survey on Lake Mead, some bighorn sheep captures, and venomous reptiles in Nevada, including one on Gila monsters. And I know you guys had some exposure to Gila monsters in September during our commission meeting in Las Vegas. We also had Southern Region Wildlife Education Coordinator worked with volunteers to start on the development of a new idea for programming, educational programs that include birding, information about desert tortoises, bighorn sheep activities, and information on predator and prey relationships. Lastly, just a couple items from the Diversity Division. Southern Region Diversity Biologist consulted with Clark County and the Nevada Division of Minerals regarding bat protection and the development of the Arden Mine Complex restoration and Bat Gate installation proposed project. Wow, that's a sentence. This project is intended to convert the area surrounding the mine complex into an urban park immediately adjacent to a developed area of Las Vegas. Additionally, staff conducted a site visit with the BLM staff to O'Malley Cave in Lincoln County to assess bat use and potential risk from ongoing archaeological excavations. This cave has Native American archaeological significance dating back at least 10,000 years. Recommendations were given relative to bat use, additional seasonal surveys, and the possibility of gating the cave. Lastly, the Diversity Reptile Biologist is continuing to survey the White Mountains for reptiles and placed 24 cover boards along 3 drainages to hopefully document Panamint alligator lizards, skinks, rubber boas, and California mountain king snakes. Finally, the Diversity Division documented the presence of a new reptile in Nevada, the Mojave fringe-toed lizard. So far, this species has been found in a 2 to 3 square mile area of southern Nevada. This will be a species the division continues to focus on to better understand where it's found, how extensive populations are in Nevada, and what types of habitat it utilizes. And that concludes a brief synopsis of some of our efforts. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Director Wasley. I know it takes you, I'm sure, a significant amount of time to put that together, and I myself would appreciate it. Maybe you'd email me I'd like to read through it for the parts that you've missed, and maybe the rest of the commissioners as well.
We'll
Since we had an abbreviated report today, that'd be good. But thank you. Any other commissioners? We'll start with Vice Chairman Johnston.
Just a quick question is, I don't know how many years ago it was when someone showed me a picture of a moose up in northeast Nevada and kind of like chuckled and like he got lost. Now they're more regular occurrence. Estimate, I think you said it was about 30. I mean, is this just an expectation we're just going to end up with a moose population? Or does anyone know?
Thank you, Commissioner Johnston.
I mean,
I believe so. I would say that probably the first sighting that I can recall was in excess of 20 years ago, and it was always considered just an anecdotal wandering young male, but now we're seeing cows, as evidenced by the 2 that were mistakenly targeted as cow elk. So we have a very real potential with both boys and girls in the wild, and anticipate we'll continue to monitor, but there's so few animals in such a large area at this point. It's kind of a needle in a haystack, but the sightings are more and more common, which also reminds me of another unique sighting that I had intended to make the commission aware of, and that was a sighting that is probably the most tangible evidence that we've received thus far relative to the presence of wolves in Nevada. The department was provided a video of an animal in northern Washoe County that was taken through a spotting scope at some distance, but all indications are that it's likely a wolf, but it was a lone animal, and we've had some anecdotal reports 15, 20 years or so since following the release into central Idaho in the mid-90s. Those animals have moved down into Utah, they moved across Idaho, into Oregon, down into California. So it's certainly possible, and we'll continue to monitor that situation and make the commission aware of any subsequent findings.
I guess that's another question then is there a link between the increased observations of moose in Nevada and where they're coming from and the presence of wolves in those locations? Or do we know?
I would say that we don't know, but I would tell you that the location of the wolf observation is on the western side of the state, and the observations of the moose have been on the eastern side of the state. So it's possible that they could be coexisting in some of those areas, but it would be likely that just due to the sheer abundance of elk, that if there was a relationship between wolves and any prey item, it would be more likely to be related to either the presence of elk, deer, or horses, just due to their abundance on the landscape.
Commissioner Barnes.
Thank you. Director Wosley, I think at the beginning of your report, you mentioned something about how we continue to lose land on a regular basis. And as a group of people that I represent on this board, the ranching community, I know there's a lot of conflicts between the ranching community and sportsmen over certain things. But I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that in the big picture, we both want the same thing. In order for our ranching operations to maintain their sustainability, we need wide open spaces. And same thing with sportsmen. If we want to maintain our hunting habitat and our resource, we need to maintain those wide open spaces. And so I think as we go on and we consider a lot of this stuff, you're exactly right. We need to keep our eye on the big picture, and that we have more in common than we don't. So it was just a comment I had, and thought it was worth mentioning.
Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony, do you mind giving a real quick 2-second blurb on your activities with AFWA, I think, and the Blue Ribbon Panel? I think it's big picture, and I certainly appreciate all your efforts in that respect, and I think people should know that what you've been up to with it. It's a lot of work.
Thank you, Commissioner McNitch. I believe that the Blue Ribbon Panel has been a topic of discussion at least 2 different commission meetings. For those who may not know, the Blue Ribbon Panel consisted of, I believe, 26, 27 different members representing a diverse contingent of individuals from business, industry, government, very, very little government representation, tasked with the challenge of finding sustainable, predictable funding to be used to implement states' wildlife action plans. Nevada's wildlife action plan covers 256 of our 900 species. Many of those are what we would traditionally call non-game species. However, it also includes mule deer, bighorn sheep, sage grouse, Lahontan cutthroat trout, and it also covers 22 habitat types. The Blue Ribbon Panel made recommendations to use oil and gas revenues, existing revenues rather than a new tax. What that would mean to Nevada, as is currently put forward, is that we would go from approximately $850,000 a year in that program to close to $21 million a year, plus 6 to 7 million non-federal match. So it would take us somewhere in the neighborhood of $27 million. So the question has been, how do we, that legislation has been introduced. There's a growing list of bipartisan supporters. As recently as last week, not this week, last week, attended a branding workshop. A marketing company has donated $500,000 of branding and marketing research to this effort. And we had a small group of individuals to help develop that branding. A report will be forthcoming on that in roughly a week's time, and that'll help launch a broader public outreach effort and branding effort. I do want to acknowledge the commission for their leadership in developing the resolution in support of the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations. And if you go to the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies webpage, I don't know if it's through a link, but there's a section that highlights the Blue Ribbon Panel recommendations, and they have a list of all of the commissions that have followed the leadership of the Nevada Department or the Nevada Commission. And at the top of that list, it says the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners. And so it was prideful moment for me to see that and be part of that. And so we're hopeful now that we'll have a brand. We spent considerable time discussing what that should look like. I think the unique thing with this effort that's different than every other effort that's tried to address dependable funding, predictable, dependable, substantial funding for conservation, as most of those efforts have been led. They've had some involvement of industry, but there's been a lot of government involvement. I think the unique thing here is it was co-chaired by Johnny Morris, the CEO and